Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to my final vlog on the UT Dallas Fall FIDE Open. You'll notice I'm not in a hotel room anymore. I'm actually back in Minnesota at my house. I flew home last night. So this game was played yesterday morning, and my opponent was Grandmaster Aleksandar Indjic from Serbia, FIDE rating of 2564. And I really wanted to end the tournament on a high note, of course. I was on a +1 score heading into this round, and I thought it would be really nice to draw or win with the black pieces against Grandmaster Indjic. And my opponent, I had kind of kept an eye on him throughout the tournament because he has a really interesting style. He pretty much plays everything. So as black in this game, I looked at a few of his previous encounters from this tournament because I think he had 4 white games prior to this. So this was his 5th white out of 9 games. And he had literally played a different move every single game. So like one game he played E4, one game he played D4, one game he played C4, and he even played the bird F4 in one of his encounters. So when you see an opponent like that, there's really not much you can do. It was kind of futile to try to prepare for everything, so I just took it easy the night before the round and decided to rest up for the battle the next morning. I think that's the best policy most of the time. So he has a pretty active style, and he seems to like to put a lot of pressure on his opponents. So I knew he was probably going to come at me, even though it was the last round, and sometimes people are a little bit more peacefully inclined in the final round of a tournament. And I guess he could have won some prize money, me too, if I had won the game. But I think mainly both of us were just looking to play an interesting game to round out the tournament. So Indjic opened with D4, and I played Knight F6. And again, I wasn't sure what to expect, and he ended up playing the Trompowsky, Bishop G5. This line is not bad at all, and you occasionally see D4 players revert to this, even players who play mainly D4, C4. So by playing Bishop G5, white creates the immediate threat of doubling up the pawns by capturing on F6. There's a lot of reasonable ways for black to respond to this, and I wasn't exactly specifically prepared for this line in this game, but I played against this opening plenty, so I know what to do. Popular moves are E6, just having the queen defend the knight. Sometimes people play D5 and say, go ahead, just take my knight, I don't mind if I get double pawns. I decided to play C5 and strike at the D4 pawn. Sometimes this even opens queen to B6, which is a nice way of generating pressure down on this pawn on B2. So C5 is a fine move. My opponent pushed D5, and I decided to play D6, so creating a nice little pawn chain. Earlier in this tournament, you saw one of my Benko games, and I was looking to set up a position similar to that. So pawns on C5, D6, E7, and then pawn G6 and fianchetto the dark square bishop. So after this, Indjic decided to play F3. And with this move, he's intending to build a big center with E4, whereupon you get kind of almost like a same-ish structure. I don't know if that's exactly the right term for this pawn structure, but I play this structure from the white side a lot via the King's Indian same-ish variation. So white sets up a bunch of pawns on the light squares, and it kind of counteracts black's pawns on the dark squares. So after F3, I just continued with my plan, G6. He played E4. I fianchettoed Bishop G7. Notice that he didn't take on F6. I think now that he's set up so many pawns here, it would be unfavorable for white to opt for this structure because his dark squares would really be hurting. Squares like E3, F2, D4, this entire diagonal. I might even pass up putting my bishop on G7 and even put it on H6. Or if I do put the bishop on G7, probably play a quick F5, and that piece on G7 is going to have free reign along this diagonal. So I was looking forward to something like that should he take, but I really didn't think he would take, and he ended up not doing that. So after bishop to G7, he played knight C3. White could also play C4 and grab more space and try to bring the knight in behind it. I was actually expecting that move. I think that move might be a little stronger than knight C3. Knight C3 allows white to develop quicker, but I think C4 and gaining a stranglehold on B5 and also helping the D5 pawn is a good idea. So instead of that though, knight C3, and here I just castled. And now my opponent played queen D2. So when he played queen D2, I thought we were really in for a fight because you notice that he's completely neglecting his kingside development and he's setting up a queen-bishop battery. From this point forward, the game really resembles a Sicilian dragon, whereupon white will be trying to initiate a attack against the black king. And with queen d2, white is always introducing the idea of bishop h6, trying to swap off the dark square bishops, because that bishop on g7 is one of the prime defenders of black's king. It's almost standing sentry right in front of my monarch, and should white be able to eliminate that bishop, they might have an easier time of getting at my king later. And also with queen d2, white frees up castling queenside. That's something that he may do in the future, just whisk his way to that side, whisk his king away to that side of the board, so he can be free to open up an attack over here. He can push his pawns without any fear of harming his king. So I don't want to just sit back and allow white to initiate this attack. I want to gain counterplay myself. So I played a6. We have like a Benko, Benoni, King's Indian like pawn structure. And with a6, I'm looking to push b5 and try to create a pawn storm on the queen side. It's almost like I'm trying to anticipate the direction that his king will go so I can be ready with a pawn storm myself. So he just decided to put the pedal to the floor and keep pushing. So he played h4, ignoring the idea of b5 and saying, I'm going to come at you with h5. And I might even sacrifice this pawn because I know that it's going to rip open the file to my benefit. And I thought about playing b5 here nonetheless just to try to gain some play, but I ultimately decided to stop him from playing h5, so I played h5 myself right now. Generally, when you're getting attacked on one side of the board, you try not to push too many pawns there, because in doing so, you actually bring your pawns closer to your opponent for a clash of those pawns. But if we compare this to a Sicilian dragon, this is something that black often does in a dragon. They play h5 specifically to stop white from playing h5, and on the whole, I think it's acceptable here. So after h5, my opponent reverted back to a4. So after this little bit of a delay on the king side, he says, okay, I'm going to try to stop you from playing b5. And here, I played queen a5. So getting my queen into the game. The main idea behind this move, actually maybe I'll ask you guys, what do you think I have in mind with queen to a5? Why did I play that move? You can pause your video if you like. Okay, so the idea of queen a5 is to renew the threat of b5. So say white were to play some developing move, let's say knight to e2. I can play b5, and I need not fear a capture on b5 because white's rook on a1 is hanging. I could just come down with my queen, and I would be winning. So queen a5 is a good way to not only get my queen into the action, but also threaten this pawn break again, b5. But as my opponent has already done, he kind of ignored this threat, and he decided to just go for it on the king side, and he played g4. So real caveman-style chess from Grandmaster Indjic. True to his style, because I've noticed in a lot of his games, he doesn't necessarily throw caution to the wind, and he'll kind of just go for it. And apparently it's been pretty successful for him because he's in the high 2500s FIDE rating. Excellent rating. So g4. And now I was already thinking we had a fight on our hands, but now I thought, okay, there's probably going to be a decisive result in this game. Either white's going to checkmate me, or I'm going to be able to defend against this attack and refute it. And I was hoping it would be the refute the attack path in this game, but you never know. This move just struck me as being unsound, but in a game with the clock ticking and white being such a good attacking player, I can fully understand why he would go for this. So I have three pieces on g4, knight, pawn, and bishop, all attacking g4. So he's not playing g4 in hopes of like regaining that pawn. He's just trying to get me to take so he can continue pushing with h5. And I did decide to take, so I grabbed the pawn here. And he played h5 all the same, so offering another pawn. And here I had a really long think. And it turns out that time pressure was a big issue for me for the rest of the game. I probably overreacted to my opponent's attacks on this side of the board. And I started burning a lot of time over my next few moves. So with h5, we've got several candidate moves. I don't think I can really ignore this move. Ignore it meaning like play something on the queen side, let's say, maybe even continue with my plan of b5, because white has some pretty clear ideas. One of them is to play h6, advance and attack that bishop, and then once this bishop is forced to the corner, continue with h7 check. And my king is really in danger if this happens. If knight takes pawn, then white's queen can swing over here to h2. And notice this pressure that he has on the open h file by virtue of having given this h pawn and opened up the file. So this is kind of a prelude to what happens in the game. I can actually allow this to happen, but the way in which I do that has to be very precise. So suffice it to say, playing something on the queen side would be a mistake in response to white's aggression with h5. I can take this pawn. I can definitely try to do that, either with my pawn or with my knight. The computer, I believe, actually thinks that knight takes h5 is the best move here, accepting the pawn and opening the bishop. But I didn't like the fact that white would play bishop h6, or at least I thought he would play bishop h6 had we reached this position, because once again, that would trade off the best defender of my king. And it looks scary. Like, one threat here, if white gets another move, is to take on h5, get me to take back, and then swoop in with the queen to g5. And guess what? I can't prevent checkmate on g7. I'm pinned, and I have no forces in the vicinity of my king to defend, and he's ripped open that pawn protection around my king. So I didn't want to take the pawn on h5, although the computer actually says that it is possible to do that. Pawn takes h5, by the way, I think would be dangerous for a similar reason. Bishop h6 with the threat of bringing the queen in. I just really didn't like the look of this. So instead of taking the pawn on h5, I decided to take on f3. So grab this pawn instead. You could argue that this move's a little bit greedy, but I had calculated a couple lines from here, and I had faith in my defensive resources. So after this, white continues with his main idea, pushing h6, attacking the bishop. And now I threw in an interesting move, and possibly some of you had seen this coming. I could play bishop h8, but instead I played f2 check. And to understand why this move is important, let me show you what would happen if I had played bishop h8 directly. I had calculated that white would continue with h7 check, and I must take it with my knight because if the king comes here, there's bishop h6 check, and my king will be forced into the crossfire with the rook. So after king takes h7, he can take my rook for free on f8 with check. I'm just getting crushed here. Actually, after king here, I think he could even continue rook takes h8 check, king takes h8, queen h6 check, and I'm going to get mated on g7 on the next move, for instance, like this. These are all themes that come up in the Sicilian Dragon, by the way, these type of sacrifices and subsequent checkmates. So lots of very dangerous attacking concepts that black has to be aware of. But had I played that bishop h8 move right away instead of f2 check, h7, knight takes h7, queen h2, so this is the primary thread of the attack. And now, if black were to move this knight, like take the bishop on g5, I just get mated on h8, queen takes h8 checkmate. So my hand is kind of forced here should this position arise. I thought I had to play bishop takes c3 check, so trying to get the bishop out of the attack from the queen on h2. But the move I really didn't like here for white is kind of a surprising move. And if you'd like to pause your video and find it, you can do so now. Okay, so the move that scared me here was bishop to d2. Just a timely retreat of the bishop. And pretty nice move, the idea being to deflect black's bishop away from helping defend the king. If white were to take here, for instance, like let's say b takes c3, I would take with my queen check. And if the bishop blocks now, then the queen can even come back all the way to g7, and black's king feels a lot safer when the queen is here to protect. She does a great job of defending the knight and also defending the h8 square. So backing up for a moment, after bishop takes c3 check, this bishop d2 move is particularly nasty because white is still threatening mate on h7, and should I play bishop takes d2 check, hoping to gain some time and slow down white's attack, white can just play king d1. Beautiful move, king d1. White's down a lot of material now, but it doesn't matter because queen takes h7 check is coming. And had we got to this position, I would actually have to revert to what I did in the game, which is play king g7, allow white to capture my knight, and try to bail out with my king towards the middle of the board. But if the pawn is already sacrificed on f2, so if this pawn is gone, and we were to reach this position, I actually have a clever little resource, and it's bishop h5 check. So should the king come to d1, and I'm kind of assuming the line is the same, the pawn not being on f3 could be helpful because I might gain time to go check, and then should white like get out of the check or block it or something, I don't know, let's just say for illustration's sake, knight e2, probably bishop e2 is stronger, but let's say knight e2, I can play bishop h5, and all of a sudden I'm able to block the file and render white's queen rook battery to be less effective. So that was kind of the deeper purpose behind giving away this pawn with f2 check, which I did several moves back. Kind of a lot to follow, and once again, this caused me to burn a lot of time during the game, like just trying to see the nuances of this and trying to calculate everything out. This was a real time burner. So I played f2 check, and white has to take this pawn. Moving the king and allowing me to take here isn't really a good idea, so white has to take the pawn. Oh yeah, and this knight is still here, by the way, and there is a pawn on h6. So f2 check. Now, maybe if you want to, you can pause your video and ask yourself, which way should white recapture this pawn? Should he take with the king or with the queen? Okay, so white should take with the queen. Queen takes f2. If king takes f2 is played, then I would have time to move this knight. I could play knight g4 check. And after the white king gets out of the check, let's say king g2, now I can move this bishop, say bishop e5. And on h7 check, I'm no longer forced to do something awkward with my king. Like I no longer have to play king g7. I can play king h8. So that square is freed up. And this pawn on h7 for white is a real problem for them because they can't use the h-file to attack. This pawn provides protection for the black king. So it's important which way white recaptures that pawn, and Grandmaster Indjic did that correctly. He took with the queen. So queen takes f2. And here once again I had a very big think. This last move and also this one caused me to burn the most time in the game. Honestly, though, I probably should have had my response prepared, but I started looking at a different line once I got to this position, and I eventually went with this other line. My original intention here was to play knight takes e4 in response to queen takes f2. And I'll pose another question. I'm already giving you guys a lot to chew on this game, but after knight takes e4, how do you think the game should go? How should white play? Okay, so on knight takes e4, there arises a forced variation. White cannot take with the knight because he's pinned, right? And also if he were to move the queen somewhere, like say to h2, this is very bad for white. I get to play bishop takes c3 check, and should they recapture with the pawn, I can take here check, and I can even go scoop up this rook next move after white gets out of the check, because h7 will always be met by black hiding the king in the corner, and black will be totally safe. So knight takes e4 is kind of a nifty move, but I didn't like the fact that after I take this pawn, white can sacrifice their queen. They can play this move. H takes g7. Now I better go get the queen. Then they take here on f8 check. Make a queen. I take back. And then they take my knight. Now this is a position, in retrospect, I think I underestimated a little bit for black. We have an unusual material balance on board. White has quite a few pieces for the queen. So they have what? Two minor pieces, bishop and knight, plus a rook for the black queen. But black has 3 extra pawns. So material-wise, we're actually pretty close. I thought white's activity, though, and the fact that my queen was way on the other side of the board and my king is looking like kind of lonely on f8, I thought that would mean that white has excellent attacking chances here, and I didn't like the prospect of having to defend against all these pieces that are about to swarm into play on the king side for white. So I rejected this line. I later looked at it with the computer, and it thinks that this line is pretty reasonable for black, and it assesses the position as roughly equal, even though it's highly unbalanced. But I kind of chickened out of this one. I was going to play knight takes e4 when I played f2 check, but upon reaching this position, I started looking at another line and eventually decided to go with that one instead. And sometimes that happens in chess, like you back down from a line that previously you had calculated because you kind of talk yourself out of it. So after queen takes f2, I did not take on e4. I played bishop h8 instead. So I hide the bishop. Now here, I spent a lot of time looking at the move white played, but it's actually possible white could just play this position kind of slow. Like even a move like castling queenside is possible. And I think the tempo of the play would slow down a little bit, and black might even play something like king h7 to block the pawn. But it would have been interesting had Indjic played this castles queenside move or something similar, because I spent so much time looking at h7 check that maybe he could have tripped me up and take advantage of my low clock just by playing a move I didn't expect. But he continued with the forcing play, so he played h7 check. And just like before, I can't afford to play king g7 because bishop h6 is going to kill me. So I must take the pawn. And now we have another forced variation. So here white played queen h2. Interestingly, the computer actually says that white should just retreat this bishop. It says just go bishop back here and don't even bother. But he played queen h2, which is what I expected. Queen h4 is kind of similar. Now, to get out of the h-file conundrum, I must take on c3. And if you compare this to the position I was looking at before, king d1 could run into that bishop g4 check followed by bishop h5. So I was expecting the move that white played, and it's bishop back to d2 once again. I must take the bishop. It's absolutely forced. Otherwise he's going to crash through on h7 or even take my bishop on c3, so take check. And white should put the king on a dark square, because if he comes to d1 or e2, I again get the bishop check resource in. So king f2. Now, once again, if you'd like to pause your video, how should black play at this stage? Try to figure out what I should do. Okay, so this next move for black had to be foreseen in advance. And the move is king g7. Only move to keep me in the game. Black has to recognize that all his bridges have been burned as far as just defending down the h-file. It's time to give up the knight and run with the king. So after king g7, white takes my knight on h7 check. And now we're going out into the wilderness, king f6. But if we stop and look at this position, yes, the king is on f6, it's extremely exposed, but black is up a boatload of material now. I'm up a piece plus 3 pawns, so 6 points of material. And if I'm able to weather this attack, that material will be significant. Unfortunately, by this time in the game, I had about 10 minutes left of my original 90 that I started with. And there is a 30-second increment, but it's never a fun situation to be in where you're in a super sharp position. Sharp meaning like the result of the game could turn on any one move, and your opponent has much more time than you. He had about probably 50 minutes to an hour at this point, so he's got quite a bit of time to spend figuring out how to terrorize me from this position. So now the tempo of the game will be white trying to prove that he has compensation for all this sacrificed material and trying to play off my time pressure. So after king f6, it's interesting how white should proceed with this attack, because you notice he doesn't have like any good checks anymore, at least direct ones with the queen. The h8 square is covered by my rook, so we can't go there. Queen h4 check could be met by just bishop back to g5, and I block him. And actually my king might feel relatively cozy here. So I was expecting white to play knight f3 right here, just to get another piece into the attack and maybe attack my bishop on d2. And should knight f3 be played, white would actually be potentially renewing this threat of queen h4 check. But I really wasn't sure what my defense would be to this move. And after the game, I actually asked him why he didn't play knight f3 here, and he gave me a nice reply. So if you've been following along and you've been looking at all these complex variations and want to give this one a shot as well, pause your video, try to figure out what black should do in response to this move. Okay, so the move that Grandmaster Indjic pointed out after the game is e5. This is the move that he didn't like, and what I could have played had knight f3 been played. Idea of e5, try to give the king an escape route to e7. excellent move. And I'm not sure I would have found this move, to be honest. I was very low on time, and if he had played knight f3, it would have really put me under the gun. But e5 is a great way to give the king some running room, basically. And white could give a check here, but this time, instead of blocking with the bishop, I can block with the pawn. And once again, my king is going to slip away. So for that reason, my opponent played e5 check. And at the time, I had no idea why he would play this move. It really baffled me. And I was pretty happy to see it because I thought knight f3 was just strong. But his idea is that after d takes e5, which is what I played, king takes would be too much. Bringing the king out into the open like that, more so than it is, would be suicide. So the idea is after d takes e5, now he plays knight f3, and he's blocked me from playing pawn e5, the other pawn to e5. I could play e6, trying to give the king e7, but here he mentioned that his idea would have been d6 to try to take away the king's e7 square. So very nice find by him to keep the pressure going and stop my king from escaping. So on knight f3, I think I played a good move here. I played pawn e4. Notice how I haven't touched any of my queenside pieces. We're already on move 20, and I haven't moved any of my queenside. But e4 is important because I really wanted to force this knight away from the f3 square. I didn't like the fact that the knight being on f3 interferes with my ability to block a check on g5. So I didn't want that knight to stick around. So after e4, now there arose an interesting psychological moment in this game because we know that I'm in serious time pressure. I've survived the first wave of the attack, and my opponent naturally wants to continue his attack and probably feels like he has me on the run in this game. He has a perpetual check here if he wants it, and that is initiated with queen h4 check. After queen h4, I have to play the king back to g7. Coming forward to f5 is going to lose immediately. Bishop h3, and that's checkmate. Pawn g5 would also lose to queen h6, and my king has to come forward again, and I'm going to be checkmated soon. So on queen h4, I have to play king g7. But white has invested so much material at this point, I really thought it was doubtful that he'd want to continue the game and try to push for a win. I thought he would just go queen h7 check, which is actually what happened, king here, and we would just have a draw by perpetual. So after we repeated, I think we repeated twice, and my king got forced back to g7, I was really expecting him to just agree the draw and we'll call it a day. But this is where my time problem kicked in because he made the judgment call to push here and try to push for the win and really make it complicated when I have little time on my clock. Had I had, let's say, 30 minutes instead of 10, I don't think he would have done his next move. I think he would have just taken the perpetual check. But he ended up playing knight to g5 here. And when he played this move, he had about 30 minutes left. So he's got about 30 minutes to my 10. And I had seen that this was possible. While he was thinking over this perpetual, whether to take it or not, I was trying to anticipate how he might continue the game, should he choose to do so. And knight g5 is one of the moves I thought he might play. And I played a good response here. And these next few moves were played very quickly by both of us. Bishop takes g5. Queen takes g5. And he's gotten rid of that dark square bishop, which was giving him issues. Now he actually can check me on h6. The threat is to play queen h6 check, and after the king moves to f6, go take the rook, is one idea. And I thought I needed some more escape squares for my king, so I played f6, which is the best move here. Pawn f6, allowing queen h6, but now I can run this way, king f7. And here, he quickly played his next move as well, so he had kind of anticipated that all this would happen. He played bishop c4. And looking at the material once again, just to remind you, we have the same balance as before. I'm ahead a piece and 3 pawns. So I was actually feeling okay. I was kind of nervous because I knew that he has a fearsome attack here, and I still have development issues. But I felt like my king was running towards the safe haven of the queen side, and maybe, just maybe, my extra material could bring about an entire reversal in this game. Maybe I'll even win because my king can survive and I'll weather the storm. So after bishop c4, I played another good move, I think, king e8, running with the king. I did this to stop d6 with check on the king on f7. I hate to make another move with the king and neglect my development. I want to bring more forces into the action, but I thought it was necessary to do that. And here he played rook a to d1. So bringing the rook into the action, previously it had just been sitting on a1, not really doing anything. But with rook a d1, he creates the threat of d6, and also he's going to track my king should it ever go on the d file. I can't really run with my king further, because if I play king d8 here, for instance, he's just going to take my rook on f8. Now, this was a tough moment, because I probably have about, 6 or 7 minutes at this point, and I knew my position was good, and I was thinking in my head, boy, when I look at this later with the computer, it's going to tell me I'm probably winning at this point if I can find the right moves to defend. But none of that helps you over the board. I mean, when you're thinking for yourself and the clock is ticking down, you only have your own intuition and your own calculation to rely on. And I knew that this was not going to be an easy task. And I played knight d7. Good move to get the knight involved. It's high time we develop that piece. A couple ideas with knight d7. One, I defend the rook. So if I want to play king d8 and move my king over to c7 and maybe even to b8, I don't have to worry about the rook falling. And also, I thought that knight coming to e5 could be a useful move. Maybe attacking the bishop and also threatening a deadly fork on the white king and the queen. So I played knight to d7, and here he played queen to g7. Good idea, I think. The computer doesn't like it that much, but compare that to like taking the pawn on g6. If he takes the pawn on g6, that kind of pushes my king in the direction it wants to run anyways, king d8. And queen g7, I think, is a more dangerous move because he's threatening rook h7, followed by piling up on the e7 pawn. Now, here is where a tragedy occurred. And chess is often a tragic game. We've all been there where we have a great position and we just blow it with one move. And that's what happens with this next move. I must say, though, even in looking at this with the computer, I'm still kind of confused about this position. It's very tough to find the best move for black here. And if you haven't seen this game yet, aka you weren't following along, I know a lot of people who watch my videos were actually following this game live. But if you haven't seen this game yet and you want to try to find the best defensive move for black, or just the best move in general, you can pause your video and do so now. Okay, so there are a lot of candidate moves here for black. Probably like 4 or 5 moves that look reasonable as a way to try to defend. And once again, the main threat for white is rook from h1 to h7, attacking this pawn. So moves that I thought about here were rook f7, trying to block the queen from attacking. Knight e5, just trying to get this knight to a good post. Maybe it supports rook f7, attacks the bishop, attacks g4. That was a pretty reasonable move. I also thought about moving my queen, which is what I ultimately ended up doing. And I even thought about playing king d8 and trying to run with the king. I don't think I'm going to show you what happens on all of those moves just because the position is so complicated. Just to give you an idea, if knight e5, d6 is a good move for white, just pushing the pawn. If rook h7, the line I didn't like after this was rook h8 check, knight blocks, and then queen takes g6. I thought this looked awkward for me because once again the king is prevented from running away. So I rejected that one. So ultimately I went with, and king d8. I think on king d8 I didn't like d6 and him opening the file towards my king. So ultimately I played the move queen to b6. But this is a double question mark move and it essentially loses me the game. The best move of all is e3 check. And the engine immediately spots it. It just says like this move is clearly better than anything else black has at their disposal. And it's a little difficult to understand, but basically e3 check is going to disturb white's king and force it to an unfavorable square. And we could run through the various permutations, but you'll kind of just have to trust me because we won't look at every single king move that is possible. But on e3 check, say king takes e3 is played, here knight e5 comes, and it comes with the threat of taking the bishop with check. And this really slows down white's attack and would enable me to defend. King g3 is apparently the best response according to the engine. Here I can run with my king, king d8, and after, say, pawn d6, this is usually the answer to king to d8, pawn takes d6, rook h7, I can play rook e8, guarding the e7 square, and should white try to bring in this rook for the attack, the problem for them is their king is now on an unfavorable square, g3. That allows queen e1 check. And the engine says that I'm winning here, even though there's a lot of heat coming down on d7, specifically because white's king is so exposed. For instance, let's say king to g2 is played right here, trying to hide. I can check on f2, and then say king h1. I can check on f3, and wherever the king goes, either h2 or g1, I will have a check on a dark square, followed by picking up the rook. So like here and take. And I simultaneously defend d7, overprotect d7 as well. So let me go back to that position just to kind of summarize what I said there. But very complex stuff. Not a situation you want to be in with only a few minutes on your clock. And I just made the wrong choice in a very tough situation is what it comes down to. Very complex situation. So yeah, the best move is e3 check, and black's king is on e8. e3 check would have won me the game, according to the engine, but other moves are inferior. So I ended up playing queen to b6, and after this, white gets a big initiative. Indjic played d6, opening lines, and mainly attacking e7, threatening queen takes e7 mate. I have to take the pawn. Here, e3 check is not nearly as good. White could play just king g3. They can maybe even take the pawn, because my queen isn't on a good square to eventually check on e1, is the point. So d6, I have to take the pawn. And now the forces start invading. He plays rook h7. Threat of queen to e7 checkmate. Now, I gotta get on my horse with my king and run away. King d8. But there's a big flaw with this line, which is something I missed. White can play queen e7 check, force the king to go to c7, and now he just scoops the rook on f8. Queen takes f8. I missed this move. So my knight is pinned. I'm unable to take because of the rook on h7. And material-wise, black is actually still doing pretty well. I have a minor piece plus what? 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. So a minor piece plus 4 pawns for the rook. But I'm done in by the fact that my pieces are all cramped and I'm pinned up. Like this knight on d7 in particular is a huge liability. There's ways that white can increase the pressure on that piece with moves like bishop e6, maybe queen e7 again, and I'm going to be hard-pressed to defend this guy. Note that my queen is now tied down to the defense of this pawn. Oh, and by the way, my original idea with queen b6 was to lend more support to that d6 square, but it just turned out to be too passive. Was the thing that did me in. So after this, queen takes f8. I tried to run with the king again, king b8. Apparently the best move is f5, trying to keep my pawns together, I suppose, and just kind of sit there. But I thought white would just build up the pressure on my knight, and I'd be a goner anyways. And that seems to be the case. So king b8 is another mistake. I allowed rook takes d7, and now the wheels have really come off for me. There's no two ways about it. Here I just lost another piece, and I'm down a rook. I have 4 pawns for it, but these pawns could be easily picked off in an endgame. I played one more move. I played king a7, just trying to attack the rook. But he came up with a good reply. Rook 1 takes d6, attacking my queen. And here I resigned because not only am I down material, but should I play something like queen takes b2, he has rook takes a6. And I am just done for. The pawn is pinned. I'd have to go back to a8. Then he could trade rooks and win my bishop on c8. So therefore, I resign in this position. Whew. All right, so if you stuck with me through this entire game and were able to understand a lot of those tactical lines, I'll consider my job a success. Yeah, just a wild game in general. And I feel I actually played pretty well in this one. I was happy with the move quality and the resources that I found to defend a pretty tough situation where white was attacking me. But the bottom line is I just took too long to play some of these moves, specifically when I was considering that f2 check move and also the whole forced line culminating with king to g7. I simply took too much time, and time is an underestimated factor in over-the-board chess. You can't sit there and think for 10, 20 minutes on a single move sometimes, and that'll just come back to bite you. And with that move, knight to g5 on, which move was it? It was on move 24. The engine says that's just a straight-up blunder for white, and that white's crazy to pass up the perpetual. But Grandmaster Indjic knew that my time pressure was going to make up some of his compensation, and I think he made the right call, actually. I think, in retrospect, given how hard that position was to defend, and the fact that e3 check was like the only move for me to win the game, he was probably right to go for it. So this taught me something very valuable. I enjoyed playing this game, but it also told me that I really got to work on my time management, and that's something that I'll be addressing and hopefully improving in my next tournament, which will be the London Classic. I'm going to fly to London about a week from now, and I'm going to play the FIDE Open there. So look for more vlogs from that tournament. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I finished the tournament with an even score, 4.5 out of 9. Lost a couple rating points, not much. Pretty much it was a wash for me, this event. But I was hoping to use this event mainly to kind of get back in shape and get back into playing high-quality tournament chess against good opponents. So anyways, thank you guys once again for the support, and hope you enjoyed this video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.